Great, so welcome everyone. Welcome to this really lovely evening. I don't know what to call this evening. I think it has got a name, but I can't remember what it is. But it's really an evening where we're going to be celebrating Sangha and celebrating friendship and celebrating the creative life of the Sangha. And, I'm going to be talking to Vishvantara about her poems. And I'm going to be talking to Manjusiha about his recently published novel called After Absalom. There it is. And hopefully we're going to post a link so you know how to buy it. And we're going to be talking about Vishvantara's poems here. But I've been friends with both of them for many years. In fact, I've been friends with Vishvantara, it feels like, since I was a child, since we were both children. But we'll come on to that in a minute. And yes, what we're going to do is just explore Vishvantara's poems, explore a little bit, let's talk a bit about our friendship with each other, our life in the Sangha. And I'll do the same with Manjusiha about his novel. There'll be about half an hour each, and then we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll finish the evening with a short puja. We've got a surprise as well, but I think I won't tell you about the surprise. It's always good to have a surprise, isn't it? So we've got a surprise. So perhaps everybody come around and say hello. We've got a socially distanced audience, a few of a socially distant audience, as well as tech people. So they'll all suddenly appear behind me. It's socially distanced, hardly breathing. So there's Ruby, there's Wayne, who else is here? And there's Ian, and there's Sam. I think Sam's going to be building a shrine with Adam, who's here. So that, tomorrow, as you know, is going to be the climax of our pop-up retreat, our Sangha Day festival. So I really, really encourage you to go along to that, go along to all of that. I particularly encourage you to go to the puja in the evening, where we're going to have our first ever completely virtual Mitra ceremonies. In other words, they'll all be doing their Mitra ceremonies at home. They won't be in the shrine room. So that's the first time we've ever done that. We've had, I think, 1 or 2, but we've never had everybody doing it. So that'll be tomorrow evening. And then tomorrow afternoon, Jan of Arch is giving the kind of key talk of the pop-up retreat, talking about spiritual community in a divided world, which has been kind of our sub-theme really for the whole week. But really what we wanted to do tonight is just have a good time, basically. We're not trying to improve you. We're not trying to teach you. If you're, well, you will be at home just now. Just about to say, if you're at home just now, where else will you be? You're probably not watching this on the cinema. So, at home, you might want to, if you've got candles at home, light some candles, turn the lights down, put your flux on the screen. So this is just going to be an evening of storytelling, of friendship. It's a kind of fireside evening. It's what I hope is it's just enjoyable. Yeah. So that's what we're going to be doing. So first of all, I'm going to talk about Vishvantara. I'll call her in a moment. But yes, Vishvantara and I have been friends. I don't know how long. It feels like we've been friends since we were children, as I say. Although, of course, that is an exaggeration. But I was probably, 25 or something like that when I first met Vishvantara. I'm considerably older now. And one of the ways that Vishvantara and I got to know each other is, I don't know how it came about, she might remember, but I asked her to teach me, and I'm sure you've all had this experience, I've asked her to teach me Schubert songs, which I'm sure you've all had that in your life. So you've asked a close friend to teach you Schubert songs. And of course that meant trying to sing in German, a language I know nothing of at all, and trying to sing, which I used to be able to when I was young, but I couldn't by the time I tried. Anyway, she valiantly tried to teach me Schubert songs. And I think that was the start of our many years of friendship. But we'll say more about that. And I'm going to call you now, Vishvantara. She'll suddenly, hopefully, if all the technology works, she'll suddenly appear beside me. There you are. She's appearing as we speak. There we are. That is Vishvantara. So welcome, Vishvantara. Nice to see you. Can we hear you? Let's just check.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. That's great. So welcome. Can you remember when we first met?
No, my first memory of you, Maitreyabandhu, is of singing songs together.
Mm. So why did I ask you to teach me the Schubert song cycle? Can you remember?
No, I think it might have been my suggestion, actually, because I was very much into them at the time. So, yeah.
I remember having to say Tusen Füßen. That's the only thing I remember from it, which is, I think it means tiny feet, doesn't it?
I don't remember.
Any German speaker probably won't be able to recognize that anyway. So, Vishvantara, we're going to explore you and your life through your poems. We've had this friendship through poetry, haven't we, for a while now? So perhaps you might say a little bit about that, and then we'll go straight into one of your poems. Let's perhaps tell everybody about our friendship through poetry.
Oh, it's been wonderful to be friends with you through poems. And I remember that you sent me some poems. I was a co-editor of an anthology of Buddhist poetry, and you sent me some poems to be considered for the anthology, and I loved them so much. I remember, running up the stairs and sort of messaging you to say how much I enjoyed them and wanted to put them in the anthology. I think I did put a couple in, and we met, and you brought more of your poems, and I remember sitting there and going through them with you, and it was just such a lovely occupation. You were so sort of receptive, and then you started writing more and more, and we've kept sharing work with each other all these years. And your writing just went from strength to strength until it moves me to tears every time you write something. It's always better than the last time.
I remember the first poem I sent you, I think, was about a mop bucket.
Yes, that's right.
Not the obvious subject for a poem. But yeah, I still feel very, very grateful to you, Vishvantara, because I remember sending you this whole tranche of poems, which must have been a nightmare to receive. And you very carefully went through them and crossed things out. And I remember you leaving a message for me on the answer phone saying that you liked them. And unfortunately, that set me off. But, Vishvantara has been a friend and mentor to me with poetry. She's just, I keep bringing them to her, and Vishvantara has just been very kindly listening to them. I can tell if a poem is any good if it makes Vishvantara cry. If it doesn't make Vishvantara cry, it still needs work on it, usually. But let's not talk about my poems. Let's talk about yours. So let's pitch in so we've chosen these poems together, poems that we both love of yours. So let's start off with you reading Pink Elephants, and then I'll ask you a little bit about that.
Thank you. Pink Elephants. In those days of moderate plenty, a freezer was a frost-encrusted tin with a sprung lid screwed to the roof of the fridge, upholding the foul and fair of children's food, peas and ice cream. Here, the pink elephants lay, awaiting their moment. Looking back, I see they were meant as a joke addition to cocktails or G&T, but my mother perceived them as seriously chic, and that was her time of innocence, pre-vodka. Their denouement had been set one glorious July, and lemonade bought specially, with straws to match the frosted pale green goblets, wherein the plastic forms would float enviably. The guests arrived, great aunties in perms and flowery dresses, with their menfolk, including Uncle Len, who on return from POW camp in Japan, had heard his shoulders squeak against each other as he walked. He told us how he'd kept his soul together by drawing a piano keyboard in the dust and playing it. We all sipped our fizzy drinks. Suddenly, my mother jumped up, all of a flap, and rushed out to the kitchen, returning with the dish of forgotten ice cubes to be plopped into a remaining inch of liquid. I can't remember if there were oohs and ahs of admiration. I only recall the disappointment in her face and the sound of a pink elephant clattering into a glass that was actually empty.
That's lovely, thank you, Vishvantara. Is it possible to get more sound? I think we're on this end. Can you hear? So, is that all right? If the speaker can be turned up a bit, if it's possible. No, okay, doesn't work. Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to start with that poem because I find it very touching. It's a sort of comic portrait of your mother, but also a sort of underneath the comedy, a sort of tragic portrait of your mother. So I thought you might start by saying a little bit about your mother.
Yes. Well, my mother she died in 2005, and she was very young when she had me, just still a student actually, and she was plunged into marriage and motherhood at a very young age. You know, still at college, had 4 children. I was the oldest of 4, and she retained her whole life. She retained a childlike quality that was very much her essence, I feel. And part of that was she very rarely didn't accept other people for what and who they were. She very rarely complained about life or people, or she wasn't in the habit of that sort of mind state, really. She was very open and receptive to the present moment, to whoever was with her, and a very friendly, open personality. And part of her childlike nature was that she would be disappointed often when she'd had a fantasy of providing these very chic ice cubes in the lemonade. And the lemonade was a drink that we didn't have because we couldn't afford that sort of thing normally. So it was a special treat, and she'd visioned these elephants in the lemonade and was so disappointed when it didn't happen. And that disappointment was characteristic of her. You know, she would be overwhelmed with disappointment. It would be tragic for those few seconds when she was. So she experienced all her emotions. Yes, so that's a little of my mother.
Mm-hmm. So let's go on to this poem, Sweetheart Come. You might need to say a little bit about this one before you talk about read it, but I really love this poem.
Yes, I will. Yes, I will, and I'll also show you an illustration of it.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Because it's actually, the poem is based on an exhibit I saw at the Hayward Gallery in an exhibition called Beyond Reason, Art and Psychosis. And this letter was written in the beginning of the 20th century, and it consists in columns of the same 2 words repeated over and over again. And those 2 words were a letter to her husband, and she did have a husband, and some of the exhibits had his name and address on as well. And these letters say 2 words, sweetheart, come. So this poem is Sweetheart, Come. The husband's visits are generally deferred, though she writes to him daily. Sweetheart, come. Her letters are composed of just 2 words. 2 eminent physicians have concurred dementia praecox. Nothing can be done. The husband's visits are generally deferred. Her warders boast no tantrums have occurred. At mealtimes they shout, cheer up, sweetheart, come. Her letters are composed of just 2 words. She prints his address clearly, unperturbed, though all her letters stay in the asylum. The husband's visits are generally deferred. Pencil stroke, like quills on a dark bird, repeat her text in columns like a sum. Her letters are composed of just 2 words. Hours go by and find she's hardly stirred. The columns lengthen, blacken, and fall dumb. The husband's visits are generally deferred. Her letters are composed of just 2 words.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Vishvantara. There's a personal element of that for you as well, isn't there? I wonder whether you'd be willing to say a little bit about that.
Yes, certainly I can. So a lot of my life, actually, quite a large chunk of years. In fact, I could go further back from when I first fell in love when I was 11. It was unrequited, and I think that pattern has tended to repeat itself many, many, many times over the years. And so I could say in a way that my life has been spent chanting this phrase, sweetheart, come, and wanting to be united with the beloved. I remember as a child reading Little Women and being struck with this. There's a scene of unrequited love in that novel, and being totally engrossed in this unrequited romantic myth, as it were, as a child. And so I think it was very deep in me and stayed with me a very long time. And I think it's fair to say that I've healed from it quite a lot in recent times. Still tune into the me that I was over the years and experience that flavor. And I think it is really for somebody like myself who is a spiritual practitioner that actually the longing for the beloved is the longing for the transcendental, the longing to be united with a wholly integrated and sort of compassionate experience. So I think that longing wasn't just not in its sort of right place, as it were. But so I think I identified with the woman in the poem, the subject of the poem, very strongly.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Sometimes your internet isn't so good. Sometimes your voice blurs a bit, but that's modern life. But you're talking from your community, and the next poem we've chosen is about your community. It's a lovely evocation of community living, which is quite a rare thing to write, I think. So I thought you might read that.
Yes. The service. Some of us wanted new dinner plates, our current ones having grown too various, different sizes, different patterns, blue and yellow, pink and green. One day, Maureen brought us home a sample from a set of 6 donated to her charity shop. This plate was larger than most of ours, oldish too, with scratches in abundance if you looked at it angled under a light. It was white. The kind of shade Dulux could have called egg white, a drip of grey, softer than brilliant, with the thinnest silver at the edge. In the end, in our community, nobody wanted it, let alone its 5 white sisters stashed in the charity shop stockroom. A note had been left on the kitchen table with space for us all to give our opinions. Someone wrote indifferent next to their initials. Soon after this, I caught through the doorframe Maureen carefully wrapping the plate as I was ascending the stairs to my room. The landing window, I saw the dinner plate of the moon, egg white, round, with a silver edge. And the sadness was for all acts of love, so reasonably and innocently rejected.
That's lovely. For all acts of love, so innocently, reasonably and innocently rejected. So how long have you lived in community, Vishvantara?
About just coming up for 30 years, I think.
Wow.
Yes.
And how is it? I mean, it's too long a time to say. How is it now, at least, living? What's it like living in lockdown in community?
In lockdown, it's a real blessing, I found, to be living in community in lockdown, because we were all in the first lockdown, we were all in the house most of the time, and managed to support each other through the various trials and tribulations of that. I find it enormously supportive at all times, but especially in this year. I think the friendships and the amount of sort of communication, help and support there is wonderful. Not that community life isn't without its, as I hint at in the poem, isn't without its ups and downs, but on the whole, I find it rewarding.
And also, of course, your retreat life. So, you know, you've lived a Dharma life for a long time now, going on retreat, living in communities, being a friend to so many people. I thought it'd be lovely to read your poem, Hair, which was written at Vajrasana, our retreat centre in Suffolk, which of course is closed. Yes, it's closed, unfortunately, but this poem really communicates something of Vajrasana, I think, albeit through the mystery of the hair. So if anyone's ever gone to Vajrasana, and if you haven't yet, I hope you will be able to go very, very soon. There are these wonderful hairs around, and because we're all very peaceful and quiet, they seem a bit happier with us, don't they, in the grounds of Vajrasana. So let's hand over to you to read Hair, Vishvantara.
Thank you. Hair. I spot her in the field, soon after waking, as good as a dream or a memory of one, though not quite as close as to be able to describe her eyeliner pencil. I descry her golden brown, wind-combed fur, and am riveted by the ears. Like a being with a pair of spatula-shaped black-tipped feathers topping their hat, like one child making a V sign behind another's portrait, or those old-fashioned television antennae. When walking, she seems as big as a fox or small dog, but she doesn't seem built for walk, tussoking away into the near distance. She pummels an almost ridiculous ear with one enormous foot and spies round in all directions. Within folklore, she appears as a shapeshifter, fur cloaking a spirit that slips and speeds out and away from grasp. However she might feel about it, this is her one perfect hair-shaped life. Watching hers, I glimpse my own, see a nimbus round that form too, which, like hers, trembles and scarpers. In this temporary pocket of peace, this Suffolk verdure, orchard and dragonfly, mustard plums, waddle line of ducks. Who can grasp even one of her 10 brown leverets that here snuggle and lick cold nose to cold nose?
That's great. Thanks very much, Vishvantara. I remember that waddle line of ducks. If anyone remembers when they were on Vajrasana on retreat, there would a particular time the mother would take her babies to the other side of the field, and there'd be a long waddle line of ducklings behind her. It was very, very beautiful. I remember being on a solitary there myself, and his hair coming right up to me. But the poem really captures the sort of majesty and liminal nature of the hair. You can see why they become so deep in folklore. But it also captures the peace of Vajrasana and that special atmosphere of Vajrasana. I remember, it was on a women's retreat, wasn't it? I think that.
Yes.
You wrote that, because I remember Shraddha coming back and talking about the leverets in the courtyard, weren't they?
Yes, they were. They used to sleep in the flower beds.
Oh, yeah, there you go. So the leverets like sleeping in the Sangha courtyard. That just feels just right, doesn't it? Really just right. So let's go on to a beautiful love poem you've written. I was talking to a young friend of mine recently. He's only in his early 20s, and he was writing songs. And he said to me, "It really is time that I stopped writing love songs." I'm saying, no, you've got another 20 years of love songs. You ain't going to get rid of it that easily. We should never quite leave that behind. So you've written this beautiful love poem. So I thought we'd just hear that, Vishvantara, as well.
Thank you. A day like this. Your tea's less sweet, but not the smile that sparks your eyes and shines. I feel unruly joy restyle my wrinkle lines. You've obviously forgiven flaws and buried my mad kiss. Our standoff even might be thawed on a day like this. Old age receives so splendidly the truth this scene revives. There are those we hold tenderly our whole lives.
That's lovely, Vishnu. I'm going to actually ask you to read that again because it's quite a short one. And sometimes with these short lyrics, which is actually really difficult to write, if you ever want to write poems, try writing a short lyric. They're by far the most difficult. Really complex things with clever things, that's kind of easy. But a short little love lyric like that, that's very, very difficult. And as I say, we're having a bit of problems with our internet connection. So let's hear it again, I think, Vishvantara. Thank
you, Maitreyabandhu. And I would also add that I consider this to be a friendship poem. Yes, it's a poem of friendship to me. Right, yeah. But I see where you're coming from.
So we might just be talking about me rather than you.
A day like this. Your tea's less sweet, but not the smile that sparks your eyes and shines. I feel unruly joy restyle my wrinkle lines. You've obviously forgiven flaws and buried my mad kiss. Our standoff even might be thawed on a day like this. Old age receives so splendidly the truth this scene revives. There are those we hold tenderly our whole lives.
That's great. There are those we hold tenderly our whole lives. That's really beautiful. Really beautiful. In a way that when I think of that as a friendship poem, then I think, well, that is very much at the heart of what we're trying to do, isn't it? And I know you've had we've been friends for 30 years, something like that. And I know you've got other friends, many friends that you've had friendship for that long. And I think that animates our Sangha. That's what Sangha is. It's a network of friendships. Bhante Sangharacharya, the founder of our order and movement, talks about a network of friendships. And I know that you're very much embedded in a network of friendships, Vishvantara. So time is rushing on. So we might need to go to legend, I think, now, Vishvantara. We're going to finish with this poem, I think, but I did want to, before I ask you to read it, just again rejoice in you, Vishvantara. You've been a very, very good friend to me all this time, a very loyal friend. We both had our ups and downs, haven't we? Not between each other, I don't think. I think our friendship has been very straightforward, I feel, right from the very beginning, when you were trying to take me through Schubert Lieder. But both of us got involved in our 20s, and we're still here. You're living in the community just down the road. I'm living in the community just above here in the centre. You haven't perhaps taught as much as I have, but you've been a real presence here at the London Buddhist Centre. You're a much loved presence, and I just wanted to rejoice in that, in your loyalty, in your warmth, in your friendship to me and to other people. There's much we should have a rejoicing in you day, Vishvantara. One day we'll get a kind of festival. You can then read your poems. So let's finish this half of the evening, this first section of the evening, with Vishvantara reading this poem Legend. You might want to say a little bit about that before we start, Vishvantara.
Yes, I'm going to say two things about it. One is that it's a poem about the birth of a Buddhist deity, Tara, and she was born from the tears of another Buddhist deity, Avalokiteshvara, who looked out, beheld the sufferings, and was moved to tears by the suffering of existence. And from those tears, intense was his experience, if you can call it experience. So intense was his compassion, that from the lake of tears that he wept, was born this beautiful goddess called Tara, who is the quintessence. I wanted to write about it, and I chose a form that it is a form that's based on Anglo-Saxon poem. So it's got 4 beats to each line, and 3 of those beats are repeated letters, and there's a halfway break in the line. And I actually gave myself the challenge that I was going to include every letter of the alphabet in the poem. Legend. Looking on the planet as a lake of lunacy, he sighed a whole sea of salty tears, where fishes swam sadly. They could feel his feelings winnow the water. He wept for them too, their need for that numbness that nothing supplies. The zephyrs picked up from their zone in the zenith his vow to vanquish the vices of suffering, even if the end of his endeavors took centuries or saw millions of mountains melt into sand. The winds bore this wailing wish for a solution. A minor disturbance developing in the distance was hardly heedable, happening so slowly, but the torrent of tears was terrifyingly uprising. A ghostly galleon engorging the waves, aboard the bow was a mysterious brilliance. Underneath umbrellas of ultra-green foliage, a jade-skinned jewel goddess, joined to the stars by aurora eyes, author of augury, princess of pity, pierced by the vow that had roared to the rolling, roistering waves, fearless queen, quintessence of quietus, excellent axis of extraordinary action, youthful and yet beyond years in wisdom, opened palm, owning her response to what's other, instep inclined towards inhumane realms, O cries of creation, O calm of compassion, keep on awakening her kaleidoscope heart.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Nick. That's our surprise, and we'll be hearing more from Nick as we go on through the evening. Thank you very much, Vishvantara. It'd be lovely to talk to you more, but I'd better move on. So I'll say a little bit first about Manjusiha, our second guest this evening. Manjusiha and I used to share a room, didn't we, Manjusiha?
We did indeed.
A very small room. I wonder whether you might say something about that time and leap in with that.
Well, very formative time for me. Yeah, just to say, it's very nice to be invited to your retreat. I'm on a different retreat, and it's almost magical to sort of beam in to somebody else's retreat. It's almost like joining another sort of Buddha field, really. Very formative time. You very kindly agreed to share a room with me, Maitreyabandhu, without really knowing me, which is sort of miraculous to me. And I feel very, very, very grateful for that. and we shared a room for about 5 years, and well, we were both writing at that time, weren't we? I think one way you talked about it, you were writing poems and I was writing prose, and actually we were sharing a computer, I think. And you were saying, well, all that we did was we just changed the line breaks. I just sort of wrote all the way through, and you sort of cut them off, you know. So yeah, yeah, very, very special time for me. And it's very nice to be doing this event with you and Vishvantara, because what I was thinking was, well, you definitely really mentored me in my writing. I think you were the first person who really took me seriously as a writer. So it feels like a bit of a lineage or something of mentorship this evening. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
I remember. Do you remember when we met in the gallery cafe to look at your first novel?
Yeah.
I remember. I'd read it was set in the. I remember it started the Brixton riots, didn't it? Do you want to say something about that novel and what happened at that meeting?
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. Quite often, first novels are autobiographical, aren't they? And that's certainly the case for me. Although the first chapter was well, 1981 Brixton riots, and you know, I was in Norfolk actually by that point, and I never lived in Brixton, but yeah, it was a novel about growing up in Norfolk in the 80s, and being one of very few sort of black or mixed race families in rural Norfolk at that time, and in a way, it was partly the comedy of that, you know, the challenges, but also the comedy of that encounter somehow. Yeah, and yeah, particularly remember that meeting. But again, all I'm going to do, I think, this evening is probably quote you back to yourself, Maitreyabandhu, because I think you talked about how impatient I was to hear what you thought of the book.
It's the only time I've ever known you. I've known you impatient one other time.
Yeah,
but I remember chatting about something, and I could feel something arising in you, and it was impatience. I'd never seen you be impatient before.
Well, it has happened, but it was like, come on, Maitreyabandhu, get on with it. What do you think? What do you think?
I remember I crossed out a lot, I think, and said it needs to start again with a four-hander of a play or something mad thing. But
yeah,
I remember coming back from. So I think we started living together when I came back from my sabbatical, didn't we? Because the idea was you were going to move into the community whilst I was away on sabbatical, and then you wanted to stay. And I think the only way to stay would be if we shared. I remember you sent me a postcard whilst I was away, but I hardly knew you at all. But we really enjoyed sharing together, didn't we?
Oh, it's incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. So we were in the first space was above what's now the larder, isn't it? And just really interesting when we moved out of that space into the space above the centre, just marvelling at how we managed, you know, 8 of us living in that space. And in a way, it didn't feel cramped when we were there.
No.
But when we left and when I looked back, it's just amazing that we managed to live in such a small space. You know, yeah. Most of us were sharing, weren't we? And yeah, it was very, very special.
I mean, the room we shared was tiny, wasn't it? And we could just about get a table in it, and there was just about enough room to put some clothes, and we had one bureau between us.
Yeah.
I had one drawer and you had another.
Yeah.
We were like that for 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. The proverbial.
Before we go into this novel, which I'll do, we will plunge into in a minute. I thought I'd like you to say a bit more about, because one of the, you know, I'd like you to talk a little bit more in your case about your father. I think he was wasn't he the only black man in the area, or at least almost in Norfolk? You and I have talked about your father quite a lot. I feel I know your father and really like him. I wonder whether you could tell us a bit more about him and that lovely story about that you know that I love to hear. Anyway, tell us a bit more about him.
Yeah. So he was Nigerian. Came to the UK in the 60s, and you know, I was born in East London, and so he met my mum, who's a white English woman, in East London, and then we moved to Norfolk, and Yeah, I mean, my dad, well, he was a larger than life character. I mean, it's an exaggeration to say that he was the only black man in Norfolk at that time, but that's how it sort of felt, you know. It was a sense of being quite visible, you know. So particularly when we moved to a town called Swaffham, which is quite traditional market town in Norfolk. Yeah, so I mean, there was another, you know, I've got two brothers, and it felt like we were the only sort of black mixed race kids at school. There was one other black guy who came to the school for a short while. But yeah, I mean, the story you're referring to, I knew you'd ask me to tell this story. And I think it's a shorthand way of giving you my dad's character or something of it, you know. And so, you know, he was Christian, and I remember there was one time when we, I think it was a barbecue in the vicarage gardens or something like that, you know, and there, you know, people from the church were there, and there was one person who, you know, worked up a lot of courage to ask my dad this question. So my dad, I sort of imagine him like eating this chicken, you know, drumstick or something like that. And this person comes up very bravely and says, "Oh, you know, what did you eat? What did you eat in Nigeria?" And my dad just said, "Missionaries." And you know, that sums him up in a way, in a sort of short little story. When I was growing up, I, you know, mostly felt embarrassment, you know, being around him, just because he would talk to anyone, and you know, but you know, later I just, well, I've got a lot to be thankful to my dad for, you know, in so many ways. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that comes to mind talking to you about this, Manjusiha, is that photograph of your grandfather.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I've told my life story in the past in community, I had a photo of my, well, my two grandfathers, so my dad's dad and my mum's dad. And my dad's dad, well, he was a chief of the clan in Nigeria. My mum's dad, you know, working class, yeah, East Ender. So it just, in a way, feels quite remarkable that they're sort of in the same family, you know, in a way, and that's, you know, that's my heritage. Yeah, and you know, just you know, there's these Steve McQueen dramas on iPlayer at the moment on BBC, and there's one called Mangrove, or Mangrove 9, which is set in Notting Hill, and it's quite close to where my grandparents lived actually, and but they would not have gone to the Mangrove restaurant, which was like such a sort of central part of the Caribbean community there, you know. So yeah, just very, very different parts of my family, really.
I'd like to talk more about that, but I want to make sure we plunge into your novel. So why don't you just read us some, and then, you know, without more ado, as it were, you, let's say it's called After Absalom. It's sort of you've recently launched it, even though it was literally published, wasn't it, a while ago, just before in COVID? But you've recently launched it, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. It was published actually during the first lockdown, so in April. Yeah. I'll just say one or two things by way of introduction, because I'm not going to start right at the start of the book. So basically, all you need to know, I think, is that actually it's shown on the cover, really. So it's a novel of someone walking down a ramp. So this really is the ramp. So the character is standing about here, and there's another character. There's a woman in a pinstripe suit standing here at the top of these steps. And what's happening is this character, the detective, is hearing some wheels approach along this section. So that's just by way of introduction. His instinct, having heard the sound of wheels travelling along the sidewalk behind and to the right of him, was that he was now being pursued, that his pursuer would attempt to make contact with the woman in the tight-fitting pinstripe suit before he did, and that he must, at all costs, prevent this from occurring. He needed then rapidly to plot the course of the next stage of his investigation, as his right foot continued its ascent in furtherance of his general presumption in favour of descent towards the woman in the tight-fitting pinstripe suit. Yet, at the same time, in the absence of further information as to the nature of those wheels, he felt he had insufficient evidence with which to do so. All he had to go on, as it's known, was the assertion made earlier in this narrative, not that he had any sense of narrative or narrative time, just presumably his own time, as it were, elapsing on the ground, so to speak, that the wheels in question were small, which could of course encompass much in terms of category of wheel, with the largest in this range perhaps being exemplified by that used on a wheelbarrow, and the smallest being exemplified by those used on the equally eponymous wheeled suitcase. In between these two extremes lay, he thought, any number of small-wheeled, non-motorised vehicles used to propel the human subject and its cargo, plus the resulting detritus. In other words, between the two-dimensional extremes, as he envisaged them, usefully making that vision available to us through means that must, of necessity, remain elusive, if not downright unfathomable to him, of the wheelbarrow and the wheeled suitcase, lay a whole family of small-wheeled, non-motorised vehicles, a family whose members included skateboards, rollerblades and skates, but not, of course, ice skates, the non-motorised scooter, the push chair, the transport wheelchair, which is to say, the wheelchair designed not to be propelled any distance by its occupant, the parcel trolley, the hand cart, the trolley bag, the pram, the stroller, Meals on Wheels, and the wheelie bin. Indeed, these latter examples introduced an important distinction that he needed most urgently to turn his attention to on the ground, as it were, in relation, that is, to the small-wheeled, non-motorised vehicle that he took to be approaching the ramp leading down to the horizontal rectangular plane from behind and to the right of him. The distinction between those small-wheeled non-vehicles that were used to propel oneself and those used to propel someone or something else, such as goods, garden waste, garbage, parcels, luggage, an old person or a child, to give only the primary examples. And the reason he needed most urgently to turn his attention to this distinction in relation to the small-wheeled, non-motorised vehicle that was approaching the ramp leading down to the horizontal rectangular plane from behind and to the right of him was quite simply the following. Were his pursuer to be propelling themselves, then this made it more likely, in Marguerite's estimation, that they would not only gain on him, as it's known, and overtake him, but they would also, he thought, intercept the woman in the tight-fitting pinstripe suit before he himself had done so, thereby jeopardising his investigation into the disappearance of Harold Absalom, the mayor's transport advisor, who was missing, presumed dead. Leave it there, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Manjusiha. So I probably should also mention to know that you published it under your given name. But I might ask you about that in a moment. But tell us about why would anyone write a whole novel about walking down a pedestrian ramp?
It's a good question. You can see my publisher has...
Not Tolstoy, is it?
No. you must feel for my publisher trying to market such a book. So, I mean, actually, this is it's the third part of a trilogy, and although it stands alone, I think, as well. And in a way, I've just been following the character. It's a sort of strange thing to say, that in the first book, the character walks down the stairs at the back of a bus, and then in the second book he enters a house, and each time I've sort of found out more about what he likes doing. Just a sort of strange thing, really. And so, with this book, I just put him into a situation where I thought he would have a sort of field day, which is sort of the case. It almost sounds like I'm disowning my part in this process, but that it just feels like just following the character, really.
Mm-hmm. And can you might say a little bit about in a way, the inspiration for the character? Because it goes back to your life, doesn't it, in Norfolk?
Yeah. So when I was growing up in Norfolk, well, we lived about 30 miles away from Norwich, and yeah, again, there weren't many black people around in Norfolk, but in Norwich there was a black man who was loved in Norwich, and basically he was someone who he would wear rubber washing up gloves, and he would walk into the traffic and basically direct the traffic in his, and he was known as Marigold because of the gloves. And he was I don't know what was going on with him, mental health issues or whatever, but he was very sort of, as I say, well loved and benign man. And when he died about 5 years ago. There were lots of people's stories about encountering him in Norwich at that time. So yeah, and yeah, in a way, so he was the starting point, and this is sort of inspiration for the central character. And what I was interested in doing is trying to have a detective's story where you're not really sure whether the detective is a real detective or whether he's somehow losing his mind. And I'm just interested in walking the line, in between those two possibilities, really. Yeah.
And each chapter is a kind of one of the parts of the comedy about each of the three books is, and it gets more and more extreme, is this digressionary style, isn't it? It's almost that he can't act. Everything is sort of, everything has to be explored in detail, and every digression takes him further and further away from what he's trying to do. I wonder whether you can say something about that. This, I mean, sometimes one chapter is just one digression, isn't it? I remember in the first book, a question about the difference between king size and queen size beds was a whole chapter, the problem of the size of beds. And in this one, we've got to, I love that comparison between a wheel from a wheelbarrow and the equally eponymous wheel of a wheelie bag, and all the wheels of a non-motorized vehicle in between. There's a lot of concern for category, isn't there? And a sort of futile attempt to find clarity in category. And then there's this incredible sort of digressive style. I wonder whether you might say a little bit about those two things.
Yeah, I mean, another friend sort of said it's like, each chapter is trying to solve a problem that most people wouldn't be that interested in. I don't really know. It's like there's a problem set each time, and what I'm trying to do is I just follow the thread of that problem, and again, another friend has said it's like each chapter is like a really bad meditation. Getting distracted on these random sort of things that actually, I personally don't think they're random. I don't even think they're digressions, actually. But the more I argue that case, the more I undermine it, I think, really. but yeah, it's I think one of the things for me with writing is it's trying to capture reality, and basically words can never do that, So it's like really trying to press as far as possible into that, and each time it's a failure because it can never succeed. People might say, "Why don't you stop?" But stop.
And sort of slightly more personal. Do you think? I don't know. Do you think in any way that expresses your life? Because you were saying when you were young, you sort of stuck out. I remember we've talked about that, and that experience of being very visible. And your father always strikes me as rather larger than life. So he's sort of doubly visible, isn't he? He's visible because of the color of his skin in a almost entirely white rural area. Do you think there's any kind of mirroring in that in this book? A sort of watching of things, and not being quite part of things. I don't know. I don't want to venture anything, but I wondered whether you feel there's any kind of, I don't know, personal expression here, because it doesn't seem to be on the face of it. But I wondered.
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I mean, there's something probably about identity there, and I think there's something about fiction that I find pretty fascinating. You know, in this extract, the characters wondering how we're even perceiving his activities. He has no way of sort of knowing that, you know. So I just find it sort of fascinating how sort of fiction fits together and what that says about identity. But yeah, I don't really know sort of beyond that. But just I sort of pursue that, but I don't know how personal that is, particularly to my own life.
I remember you used to go and sit at the first floor of Costa, was it, or somewhere like that? Where was it? I remember really you telling me where you had to write, and as soon as you told me where you had to write, I thought, oh yeah, you are a writer. So you could perhaps say a little bit about that, and we'll come to a bit more reading in a second.
Yeah, it's an unnamed, well-known cafe chain, which I haven't been to actually since since the start of the lockdown. So I've had to find other means of writing. Like a lot of us, I'm sitting in the park. I've got a sort of found this piece of card that I can rest my sheets on, and so I'm doing editing in the park these days. But yeah, I suppose it's partly to do with the ritual of writing, isn't it? You know, I think I took, you know, the first novel you read, I'd spent about 10 years working on that. And I think the consequence of that conversation with you was just to abandon it, basically. Yeah.
We were great friends.
We're still friends. You know, that wasn't the end of the connection. But no, it was very, very helpful, really. Why am I saying that? I mean, I suppose, you know, I feel like that novel was my apprenticeship. And obviously I feel like serving my apprenticeship. But part of that apprenticeship was working out what are the rituals I need in order to write, you know. And yeah, being upstairs, being in the right seat in that unnamed sort of cafe or whatever, that's definitely part of it. And there's all sorts of other sort of strange sort of, you know, ritual elements to it. I mean, maybe that's too grand a word, really, but
no, I don't think it is. I think that writing has got so much sort of ritual. I mean, for me, you know, the particular kind of, I know this is true for you, the particular kind of notebook, whether it's lined or unlined.
Oh yeah.
Whether you use a pencil or a pen, or I've got a particular pencil, which, you know, it becomes like weird, doesn't it? But it's like ritual accoutrements in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And I mean, I think there are some rituals that I hope nobody will ever find out, because they're so embarrassing in a way. Like, why does that make any difference even, you know? But somehow it seems to, yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to read again, just to finish this this discussion, at least for now, and then we're going to have a short break, and then we'll finish with a Buddhist ritual. But yeah, I just really recommend people to buy the book. There, I'll show it you a bit closer. It's very difficult to describe, but I mean, you'd have to say that it's about a man walking down a pedestrian ramp, but that doesn't tell you how funny it is. It doesn't tell you how observant it is. It doesn't tell you how Manjusiha in the novel kind of finds all sorts of things that you never thought of thinking about. I think you can get it, can't you, directly from Salt. Salt is your publisher. I think we're going to be able to post the link. Yeah, so we posted a link to Salt, Manjusiha's publisher. It's called After Absalom, and it's the author name is Simon Okoti, which is your pre-Buddhist name, isn't it? I think I remember talking to you about that, Manjusiha, and I think we both thought that, look, it's difficult enough as it is without having After Absalom, a book about a man walking down a pedestrian ramp, written by Manjusiha. You know, it might as well have After Absalom, written by After Absalom. So I think we both decided probably the simplest thing to do was use your pre-Buddhist name as a kind of writing name, didn't we?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
So let's conclude this section of, because I came to your virtual launch just recently, and the only thing I was unhappy about it, I thought we didn't hear enough of the book. So I thought we'd finish this little section with another piece from the book, and then I'll ask, and then Nick will appear magically behind. It's almost like he's on one of those things that brings you through the floor of the London Buddhist Centre. He'll play a few notes, and then he'll continue as we have our tea break, just a 5-minute tea break, and then we'll all come back together to do a short ritual to conclude. Over to you, Manjusiha.
Thanks very much, Maitreyabandhu. Yeah, so this is towards the end of the book, and yeah, it's a novel about a man walking down a ramp. He doesn't get very far down the ramp. I don't want to give any spoilers or whatever, but this is one way that he resolves the difficulty of the walk. What was he to do now, he wondered, with his right foot in place, which is to say, the right foot having landed on the inclined surface that was the ramp leading down to the horizontal rectangular plane. He was, in a sense, back where he began, in that his right foot was now to the right of his left foot and vice versa, which is to say, for completeness, that his left foot was to the left of his right foot. And the parenthetical clarification was, on reflection, wholly justified, he thought, given, as before, the potential confusion between the variables, even if the range of potential values of these variables was limited. In fact, it was limited to 2 values, each of which could be taken to be the opposite of the other, in that these 2 values were left and right. So the field of values was a set consisting of no more than and no less than 2, which was to say that the field consisted of precisely 2 values. The value, if that was what it was, left, and the value, etc., right. It was not then the set of values that was the complicating factor in determining what he should do next, as he noticed that the woman in the tight-fitting pinstripe suit had started to scrutinize him and his actions in a way that was hitherto unthinkable, as she continued down the flight of stairs towards the horizontal rectangular plane that also formed the landing position for the ramp down which Marguerite hoped to continue shortly to descend. Instead, it must be the complexity of the function into which these variables must, as it were, be plugged in the situation he found himself unable to proceed within, which is to say, a situation in which his right foot had landed on the downwardly inclined slope that intersected the horizontal rectangular plane towards which the woman in the tight-fitting pinstripe suit was also gravitating, and, having landed, left him, given the complexity, not really quite knowing how to proceed further, both physically and in his investigation into the disappearance of Harold Absalom, the mayor's transport advisor, who was missing, presumed dead. Unfortunately, the situation was in fact more complex than even he had imagined, given that his right foot was in fact in advance now of his left, since, as we know, it completed its partial circumnavigation of the latter by tracing the curved part at the perimeter of what he had originally termed a hemicircle and now referred to as a hemi-circumference, with the majority of that curved part located mostly to the right of that left foot and centered upon the center of it. What this meant was that there was at least one further variable in play, as it were, a variable that could be assigned one of 2 opposing values, but values that were in fact different to the previously identified values of left and right. And these values were, of course, the aforementioned in front of and behind. The situation he found himself in then was one of stasis or near stasis, given that the functional relationship appeared to be too complex for even his exceptional investigative mind to compute. One in which there was a series of binary variables relating to foot identity, left or right, lateral position, to the left of or to the right of, and longitudinal position, in front of or behind, with the field of values for each of these variables consisting of left foot and right, to the left of and to the right of, and in front of or behind. Upon still further reflection, however, Marguerite realized that this was not in fact the end of the complexity that he or his feet found himself or themselves in, given that he was on a decline, remember, suggesting that when one of his feet was in front of or behind the other, then it must ipso facto also be below or above the other foot, respectively, as in the current scenario. Tempted as he was to sort out the interdependencies between these values and variables as a way out of this impasse, he decided instead to dramatically reduce the number of variables as an aid to decision making and to the prompt recommencement of his investigation into the disappearance of Harold Absalom, the mayor's transport advisor, who was missing presumed dead. And the way in which he would do this was by simply bringing his left foot to rest alongside his right. At a stroke, then, he would rule as inadmissible any but the most basic propositional determinants, and in so doing would surely render the means by which he would continue to unearth the circumstances of the disappearance of Harold Absalom adequately clear even to the rawest of raw recruits. It was in this way, then, that he would decisively move forward at least one stage in his investigation as, lifting the heel of his left foot from the decline upon which it had hitherto been resting, an action he accomplished by moving his centre of gravity forward slightly and increasing the angle subtended between his left shin and the top of his left foot, he commenced the action of moving that foot through a flat parabola whose shape would, he hoped, result before too long in that left foot coming to rest alongside and simply to the left of its pedicurial counterpart.
Thank you very much. That's really wonderful. Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's really lovely. Thank you. I think it's the first time you played in the shrine room, isn't it? That's really lovely. And thank you very much, Manjusiha. So what we're going to do now, just have a short 5-minute break, and I'm going to ask Nick to play some more. And then in 5 minutes' time, we'll just conclude the evening with a short puja, which will include a musical offering. What we wanted to do this evening was, I don't know, celebrate friendship, celebrate Sangha, and celebrate the creativity of the Sangha. So we've got Vishvantara writing poems over there in her women's community that she's lived in for all this time. We've got Manjusiha and my friendship with Manjusiha and him writing his novel. He lives with Don Utah just nearby. And then we've got Nick playing in the shrine room for the first time. And that's just a little tiny, putting your toe into some of the creativity within the Sangha, artistic creativity. And of course, creativity is much more than artistic. Human communication is creativity, meditation is creativity. I don't know, just being properly, just practicing the Dharma is a great form of creativity, perhaps the deepest form of creativity. But let's have a 5-minute break, and then we'll conclude with a short puja. So we'll be finished, I think, by just after 8:30. Okay, see you in 5 minutes' time. That's really lovely. Thank you very much. Really, really lovely. Really lovely thing. I'm so glad that you could come and play. It's really lovely to have that in the shrine room, isn't it? Really, really lovely. Okay, so let's finish with just a short ritual. We'll do the threefold puja. Any of you who have never done a ritual before, it's really suitable that we're doing it after listening to poems and prose, because all of the arts come out of ritual. At one point, all the arts were together in ritual. So you had music, and that went on to become Beethoven and then Nick. Crossing, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some T-Rex. Anyway, never mind, let's move on. Then, ritual involves a degree of drama, and that went off to be Shakespeare and the Queen's Gambit. There we go, I managed it. And then ritual contains poetry, and that went on to be Milton and Elizabeth Bishop, and then Vishvantara. And then what else is there? Then there's movement in ritual, so that went off to be dance. What else is there? Huh? Oh, there's painting. Guillaume is giving me some hints. So that ritual is nearly always is always in a ritual space, and what you have then is ritual images, and so that went off to be sculpture, and it went off to be painting. All of those things have left the ritual context, but ritual, they all come out of ritual, and it feels appropriate this evening that they come back into ritual. And ritual is always about something that lies beyond our ordinary cognition. I've been very influenced by reading recently by reading Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, which I think outside of the Dharma is the most important book I've read for years. He talks a lot about the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain. I know nothing about the left or the right hemisphere of the brain, but one of the interesting things that he brings out in his book, and do have a look at the interviews that Jonna Vartra and I have done for Poetry East with Ian McGilchrist, one on consciousness and one on culture. But the left-hand side of the brain in his reading, and it's interesting, it's not reductive, he's not saying everything comes down to brain function, but he's saying the left-hand side of the brain is to do with division, detail, abstraction, category. It's also angrier, it's associated with anger, that side of the brain. The right-hand side of the brain is to do with wholes, the context, the meaning, the deeper meaning of things. It's also where the religious sense is. So you could say, he would use the language of ritual is trying to balance up your brain. He doesn't mean that as reductively as it sounds, but one of his great arguments in that book, and I'd very much recommend it, is that we're all of us getting more and more left-brained. We're more and more obsessed with the part rather than the whole, with the detail rather than the context, with abstraction rather than particularity, with individuality as a category, or a category as a person rather than a community, a living community, and so on. A wonderful book. So it's in a way a very good argument for the value of religion and for the value of ritual, if you need one. But of course, if you need one, that's all very left brain. It's a new insult. You can say to someone, that's very left brain. Blind them with a tiny, tiny bit of science. So we're going to do this threefold puja. It's called puja, just means worship. So let's turn the lights down a bit more. So we're going to do the first stage. I'm going to just say the words. I'm going to ask you to say them back to me. So what I would suggest, you'll be at home. What I would suggest is you turn your main lights off if you've got your lights on. Either turn the light of the screen down, or so that you're in this darkened space. See if you've got candles at home. If you've got a shrine at home, you might want to put your laptop on the shrine, or you might just want to have the laptop behind you and just do this ritual to your shrine. So what we'll do is I'll do a verse in call and response, and do respond at home. You know, never mind your flatmates. You know, they're weird. They're just as weird as you. They're just weird in weirder ways, actually. People get really funny about ritual. It's so weird, it's so strange. And yet most of the world we don't understand, but we happily get onto tube trains that go under the ground. And then we talk about ritual being strange. You think, don't you think it's a bit strange going under the ground in a train? You know, what about that? Isn't that a bit dangerous? Yeah? Anyway, so your flatmates are going to be as easily as weird as you are. So just, you know, see if you can do the responses after me, and the people in the shrine room here will respond as well. And then after the first section, I wanted to have a musical offering, because I wanted, again, to bring the arts back into ritual. So what I suggest is we just close our eyes and we just try to really attend to music. Yeah, music goes so deep for us human beings. Again, from Ian McGilchrist's book, there's more and more evidence that suggests that human beings use music before speech. I won't go through all the evidence, although it's quite compelling, the evidence. You know, like with a baby, you don't say, "Hello, little baby, how are you? How's your day?" You go, "Hello, little baby, you know, you do all those musical sounds, don't you? And you do it instinctively. You do it with dogs as well. You know, "Hello, little doggy." You know, you do musical sound. They think that that's how humans communicated for much of the time, with sort of music. And that makes sense of why poetry is an older form than prose, because you get music, and that the next form that will take is poetry, because poetry has got music within it. Yeah, and prose is very late. So it feels right, doesn't it, in ritual, just to open up to a little bit of music. And then we'll have two more sections of the poem. Not the poem, the ritual, the worship ritual. Don't worry about the words, don't worry about what we're doing, just open up. You know, look, we've lit candles, we've turned the lights down, there's this golden figure. You don't really need me to explain that to you. You know, you don't really do. The golden figure represents our ideal. You know, you've got an instinct for all that. It's only if you're right on the left-hand side of your brain do you need me to say it's about atmosphere, it's about your ideal, it's about feeling. It's like there, I can see it on the screen. That's it. And the words are like the words that this scene behind me is speaking. Yeah? And then at the end of the verses, Wayne will lead us in the Shakyamuni mantra, and we'll be making offerings here in the shrine room. And if you got your shrine at home, I'd just make offerings there at home. Yeah? And Vishvantara and Manjusiha are still here, I know, so they'll be joining in as well. And we'll have people joining in from the main shrine room here at the London Buddhist Centre. And then once the mantra dies down, just a moment of quiet, and then I'll just say a very, very short good night. And then I suggest you just flip down the lid of your laptop, and that we all convene tomorrow for our Sangha Day wonderful festival, with the talk, with all the things that are happening tomorrow. Okay, so let's, when you're ready, just closing your eyes. The threefold puja, opening reverence. We reverence the Buddha.
We reverence the Buddha,
the perfectly enlightened one,
the perfectly enlightened one,
the shower of the way.
the shower of the way.
We reverence the Dharma,
We reverence the Dharma,
the teaching of the Buddha,
the teaching of the Buddha,
which leads from darkness to light.
which leads from darkness to light.
We reverence the Sangha,
We reverence the Sangha,
the fellowship of the Buddha's disciples,
the fellowship of the Buddha's disciples,
that inspires and guides.
inspires and guides.
Reverence to the three jewels. We reverence the Buddha
We reverence the Buddha
and aspire to follow him.
and aspire to follow him.
The Buddha was born as we are born.
The Buddha was born as we were born.
What the Buddha overcame,
What the Buddha overcame,
we too can overcome.
we too can overcome.
What the Buddha attained,
What the Buddha attained,
we too can attain.
we too can attain.
We reverence the Dharma
We reverence the Dharma
and aspire to follow it
and aspire to follow it
with body, speech, and mind
with body, speech, and mind
until the end.
until the end.
The truth in all its aspects,
The truth in all its aspects,
the path in all its stages.
the path in all its stages.
We aspire to study,
We aspire to study,
practice,
practice,
realize.
realize.
We reverence the Sangha
We reverence the Sangha
and aspire to follow it.
and aspire to follow
The fellowship of those who tread the way.
the fellowship of those who tread the way.
As one by one we make our own commitment.
As one by one we make our own commitment.
An ever widening circle,
An ever widening circle.
the Sangha grows.
The Sangha grows.
Offerings to the Buddha. Reverencing the Buddha,
Reverencing the Buddha,
we offer flowers.
we offer flowers.
Flowers that today are fresh and sweetly blooming.
Flowers that today are fresh and sweetly blooming.
Flowers that tomorrow are faded and fallen.
Flowers that tomorrow are faded and fallen.
Our bodies too, like flowers,
Our bodies too, like flowers,
will pass away.
will pass away.
Reverencing the Buddha,
Reverencing the Buddha,
we offer candles
we offer candles.
to him who is the light.
To him who is the light,
We offer light.
we offer light.
From his greater lamp, a lesser lamp we light within us.
From his greater lamp, a lesser lamp we light within us.
The lamp of Bodhi,
The lamp of Bodhi,
shining within our heart.
shining within our heart.
Reverencing the Buddha,
Reverencing the Buddha,
we offer incense.
we offer incense.
Incense whose fragrance pervades the air.
Incense whose fragrance pervades the air.
The fragrance of the perfect life,
The fragrance of the perfect life.
sweeter than incense,
sweeter than incense,
spreads in all directions
spreads in all directions
throughout the world.
throughout the world. Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha. 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 Om Muni Swaha. Okay, good. So that's almost all we've got time for tonight. So I'm going to ask Wayne, who's one of our tech crew tonight, to snuff out the candles as our final leaving. And what I would suggest is that you, as the last candle is snuffed out, that you just close the lid of your computer, turn off everything, and have an early night. And then we'll have our Sangha Day celebrations tomorrow with a talk, including a talk by John Archer. Of course, I think 10 lip sounds in the evening in part of a special Puja celebrated Sangha Day.